end of the session because we have a few that are really carried over from the other session. So what my suggestion is go with all the country statements pertinent to this agenda, to this session, and then let's go back to the one from the previous session that we couldn't do yet, and then we go to stakeholder statement. But I would need to know these guys.
Yeah, so I think there was someone from
They can, but then we need to go through all those from this session and the other session that they want to speak. And then after this, we can open and then we can vote. So we'll do that. So let's also, for not confuse the sheet, let's go with all the countries statement we have from this session and the previous, and then let's open to other countries who want to speak, and then we can.
Yeah, but I think they have
there is a
But just give them the opportunity to tend not to come back much. People who come back after that. Can we have an announcement outside? Yes, yes, I already. Thank you so much.
You see, it's right here.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, kindly return to your seats. We will start soon.
Thank you.
We have some people from Capital.
Or one from Ministry of Finance.
Yes. Thank you. It's a long way.
And 2 will be coming next week.
But if you have the USB, otherwise this it will take at least like half an hour, but then it's under a gigabyte. If you have a USB stick.
Thank you.
Hello, can I help you? They will be talks at the beginning because we only have a very short intro and then we'll go to the next minute. So we'll have all the it'll only take like 20 minutes and then we'll go into the statements.
Can we know where
around 2:20ish, depending on if we can start now. So then around that time. Yeah. Did you request and submit? Okay. Well, if you yes, well. But I can give that back to you so you can start. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, kindly take your seats. We will begin. I'll just come over to, you're sitting in your country seat, right?
Yes,
yeah, I'll come bring it to you when it's done. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. I hope you've enjoyed your lunch. I would now like to invite our chair, Her Excellency Kika Stowers, to conduct the session.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, the meeting is called to order. A very pleasant good afternoon to you all, and it is indeed an honor and privilege for me to assume the responsibilities of session chair for our consideration of agenda item 3, strengthening the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Specifically, this session will discuss the theme of progress on the regional roadmap for implementing the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development in Asia and the Pacific. The document pertinent to this agenda item is Progress with regard to the regional roadmap for implementing the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development in Asia and the Pacific. This session is structured as follows. First, we will play a short video with voices from ESCAP member states to present ongoing efforts to achieve the 2030 Agenda. Second, I will invite Mr. Kaveh Shahidi, Deputy Executive Secretary for ESCAP for Sustainable Development, to provide a keynote input on progress made on the regional roadmap. Finally, I will open the floor for the delivery of country and stakeholder statements to discuss progress made for sustainable development in the region and opportunities for regional cooperation. I kindly ask for your attention while we present the video.
In a landmark agreement reached at APFSD 2017, Asia and the Pacific became the first region to adopt a roadmap to implement the 2030 Agenda. The roadmap focuses on 6 regional priorities: climate change, energy, disaster risk reduction and resilience, management of natural resources, connectivity, and leaving no one behind. The regional roadmap has enabled ESCAP member states to chart a course for delivering inclusive and sustainable development in Asia and the Pacific. The success of member countries to transition to sustainable development will define the global progress on the Sustainable Development Goals.
One of the curriculum is regarding about the climate change. So from especially in the elementary school, so we call Adiviyata. Adiviyata is a kind of activities for the student to be comply with the environment, especially for the climate change. For example, plant a tree in the school area, in the school garden.
We have 250,000 villages in the country. So the target was to provide electricity to 100% of them by 2022. And through grid expansion and DISCOMs. The DISCOMs within the state governments were financially stressed. So through 2 programs of strengthening the institutions and strengthening the DISCOMs, and through grid intensification and extension, just 1,307 villages remain as of today from the 250,000 villages which do not have electricity. So you can understand the scale of performance in the last 3 years.
In poorer district, the government has established a system where the people get the early warning system, like the farmers community, the people who are engaged with the agriculture sector. So in this way, they are having a prior information about what would be the precipitation rate in the coming monsoon season particularly. And because after 2010 flood were enormous in Pakistan, and the flood protection warning system has been established. So in this way, the resilience of the community has been increasing day by day, and they are getting more aware what would be the severe consequences if we don't adapt.
Kazakhstan is committed to the protection of natural environment as part of its work to achieving SDGs. And Kazakhstan currently has 10 sites designated as wetland of international importance, so-called Ramsar site, with surface area of more than 3.1 million hectares. Since the initiative began in 2003, more than 1.6 million hectares have become nationally protected areas. Illegal fishing has decreased by 45%, and 2 nature reserves have become the first in Central Asia on the UNESCO World Heritage List.
China has established its national plan for internet access for the whole country. There are 2,100 villages of internet markets, and there are more than 490,000 internet stores all over China. So this internet store from the countryside promoted their agricultural products, handicrafts to the outside of China, and it's very successful.
Today, I am pleased to announce that as a result of our free education program, 1 million new children are in school, and of the 1 million new children, more than 50% of them are girls in classroom today. And we know education, for us, a big strategy lies in education. We're giving free education, we're embracing our children into our educational system, and then from there we are running programs like Women in Business, Women in Politics. Our government has gone in a big way to promote education as a tool to empower girls and empower our women in PNG in general, but more importantly, because we are heavily rural-based, hopefully we can lift our rural women and children in the process.
The Secretariat, together with other agencies, funds and programs of the UN and partners in the region, will continue to strengthen implementation through capacity building, access to normative work and technical cooperation. ESCAP and its member states will track the progress made on the regional roadmap on an annual basis at the Asia-Pacific Forum for Sustainable Development.
I now invite Mr. Kaveh Shahedi to give his keynote input.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It's my honor to provide a few points from the Secretariat to kickstart the discussion on this agenda item. I think we just saw from this short video clip what an extraordinarily wide-ranging and ambitious agenda the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development is. We've heard country voices speaking to education, disaster risk reduction, internet access, natural resource protection, gender mainstreaming. There's a huge amount that goes into the success and delivery of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Here at the regional level, countries have the regional roadmap for implementing the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development in Asia-Pacific. And it's one way of bringing coherence to the regional approach needed for the transformations that must happen to deliver on the 2030 Agenda. The roadmap, as you heard in the video, is the first of its kind. It was agreed at last year's Asia-Pacific Forum on Sustainable Development and subsequently endorsed by the 73rd session of the Commission with overwhelming support by member states. So it's been very much lodged in the intergovernmental processes of this region and of ESCAP. As you know, the roadmap identifies priority areas of regional cooperation for implementation of the 2030 Agenda that address transboundary economic, environmental, social challenges, including the areas that were highlighted in the video: leaving no one behind, strengthening disaster risk reduction and resilience, combating climate change, better management of natural resources, improved connectivity, and sustainable energy solutions. The roadmap also identifies the means of implementation, including better data and statistics, technology innovation, access to finance, policy coherence, and partnership all as critical elements of being able to take forward the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development at the regional level. As has been outlined in the roadmap, review of progress in implementation takes place annually as part of our forum here, the Asia-Pacific Forum on Sustainable Development. Over the past year since we last met, ESCAP has strengthened support to member states in their efforts to implement the 2030 Agenda, probably around 4 key areas that the roadmap had identified for us. First, in terms of analysis of trends, issues, and policy options. Through the SDG baseline report, as well as sub-regional and national assessments and outlooks, we've managed to support stock-taking, implementation, and review of the SDGs. Just to give one example, at the regional level, the thematic report that you've seen before you, developed by ESCAP, UNDP, and ADB, is one of these knowledge products that we hope is helping countries to conceptualize trends, issues, and policy options for implementation of the 2030 Agenda. But we've also gone at the level of sub-regions as well. For example, the report and the work that we have been undertaking on complementarities between the ASEAN Community Vision 2025 and the UN 2030 Agenda, jointly with the government of Thailand and the ASEAN Secretariat. So it's not just at the regional level, also at the sub-regional level and at the national level, where we've been working with countries to map their own sustainability outlooks, for example, the case of Mongolia. A second area that we've been working on is knowledge sharing, including through the SDG help desk that we launched this morning, I believe. Yes. And the ESCAP statistical database and SDG portal. So we are building that knowledge base and knowledge sharing possibilities. The third area is on technical support and capacity building, especially through what we call the SDG Rapid Response Facility. We've managed to support countries with implementation across the different thematic areas of the roadmap as per their requests and as per their priorities. In 2017, we deployed 10 missions at least to various countries in Asia-Pacific to provide technical support on integrated analysis, for example, approaches to SDG planning, data and statistics, stakeholder engagement, amongst other areas. And finally, multi-stakeholder engagement. ESCAP has been strengthening engagement with a range of stakeholders from academia, think tanks, and the private sector. For example, ESCAP's Sustainable Business Network has been aligned explicitly with the SDGs, and we will launch later today guidelines for multi-stakeholder partnership. And of course, we have embedded the voice of civil society and multi-stakeholder within the APFSD itself in its sessions and in its outcomes. The documents that you have before you, that Madam Chair referred to, obviously summarize ESCAP's engagements across the priority areas of the roadmap, all of which were facilitated through the conference structure of the Commission, existing expertise within the sub-programs of ESCAP, through the regional institutes of ESCAP, and strengthening partnerships within and outside of the United Nations with sub-regional entities like ASEAN, the Pacific Island Forum Secretariat, and through, of course, the thematic working groups of the Asia-Pacific Regional Coordination Mechanism, which brings together the whole of the UN family. I'd like to mention just a few of the highlights that you will see in the documents that are before you. The Secretariat did its best to support evidence-based policies for a transformation to leave no one behind, covering aging, youth, migration, and disability. Last year, I'd like to just highlight one of the efforts that we had, where we partnered with China to convene the high-level intergovernmental meeting on the midpoint review of the Asia-Pacific Decade of Persons with Disabilities in Beijing, where Madam Chair was very active as well, and where the countries reviewed progress on the Incheon strategy, the very specific targets, goals, and indicators of that strategy. Similarly, when it comes to disaster risk reduction and promotion of resilience, we've released the Asia-Pacific Disaster Report in 2017. I hope you've seen that. It's really one of the top quality reports that have been released, which helps to identify the regional priorities, but more importantly, some of the solutions, the policy options that countries have before them as they build their own resilience. And to help with building that resilience, we've also managed to get the Asia-Pacific Center for Development of Disaster Information Management up and running with the support of the host government of Iran. Our efforts on climate change have been stepped up. Many of you were present with us during the Asia-Pacific Climate Week, which I think took forward the agenda, and we ran that Climate Week hand in hand with the UNFCCC Secretariat, so trying to ensure that there is a coordinated follow-up to decisions that come out of that process as well within our region. We saw on the natural resource management and environment, the Ministerial Conference on Environment and Development, that was co-organized this time for the first time with the UN Environment Programme, and identified some of your priorities for addressing environment and development agendas within the SDGs. And a number of analytical products have followed after that, analyzing, for example, resource efficiency transitions that you wish to put in place within your countries, and transitions that we will support at the regional and sub-regional level as well. And of course, we've continued to support the connectivity agenda for 2030, whether it's facilitation of cross-border paperless trade, work on energy, ICT, through the Asia-Pacific Information Superhighway, or transport. And finally, we've scaled up our work on energy, SDG 7. Next week, we have the major Asia-Pacific Energy Forum taking place here in Bangkok, and we will take forward that conversation. And it's a conversation that started a few weeks ago where DESA brought their global SDG 7 conference here to this conference hall to look at follow-up and review of SDG 7. So we had the global conference, we have the regional one, and all of this feeds into the high-level political forum that takes place in New York. And all of this has really been made possible, and I think has been, in a way, turbocharged by the roadmap, because the roadmap provides opportunities for these regional approaches and engagements along priority areas of cooperation that you have helped to lay down. We saw in the video that many countries in Asia-Pacific have already begun translating the agenda into action. Usually it starts with more the processes and procedures, putting in place the processes and procedures for implementation, the coordination structures, followed by really the SDG implementation needs themselves. On our side, the Secretariat will continue to follow up and support all of you, all of our member states, on the implementation. Of course, we'll continue to provide annual updates and recommendations to member states, including here, through the Asia-Pacific Forum on Sustainable Development, and thematic and statistical reports that you will see coming out from ESCAP in the coming weeks. Here we really very much invite and hope to hear from member states. We want you to share with us your suggestions for the annual review process at future forums. This is the first time we're doing it, and we're very open to learning more, how we can capture the richness of progress that's being made on the implementation of the roadmap within your own countries to complement what we can bring to you in terms of what is happening at the regional level. And all of this because we want to, as a Secretariat, really capture, monitor, and evaluate progress and collective progress in our region in the coming years. We know from the work we've done, we know from the voices that we have heard from the countries that there's still a long way to go on the implementation of the 2030 agenda. But I think with the roadmap that you have laid before us, ESCAP member states have set the course for a transformation in the region and for delivering this inclusive and sustainable development that we all wish to see in Asia and the Pacific. So, Madam Chair, with that said, thank you again for giving us the time to provide some thoughts, and we look forward to now hearing from our member states, from our civil society partners, and from yourself.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sahedi. And I will now open the floor for country and stakeholder statements for this session. After, I will open the floor for statements from the previous sessions. And may I kindly remind delegates to reduce their statement to no longer than 3 minutes length to allow all delegates the opportunity to speak. I recognize the distinguished delegate from Myanmar. Not here. So, Mr. Secretary, seeing that the delegate from Myanmar is not here,
It's empty. It's empty.
nobody. May I not take my hat off as chair, and I would like to take this opportunity to present my country's statement. Samoa wishes to contribute to the discussions on the review of the regional roadmap for the implementation of the Agenda 2030. The theme, leaving no one behind, importantly requires particular attention to human rights and fundamental freedoms, non-discrimination, gender equality, and the meaningful participation of civil society and youth as prerequisites for inclusive and sustainable development. The promotion, respect, protection, and fulfillment of all rights and fundamental freedoms for all, without distinction of any kind, is indispensable to ensuring that no one is left behind. This is reflected in our ongoing commitments to ratify all the key human rights conventions Samoa is party to. Inclusive and sustainable development can only be achieved with the realization of gender equality and the human rights and empowerment of all women and girls. The 2030 Agenda calls for the systematic mainstreaming of a gender perspective in the implementation of the agenda. In the Samoa context, gender equality is mainstreamed throughout all plans, including the strategy for the development of Samoa and sector plans and strategies for implementation of the agenda, and that B, progress in the realization of gender equality is monitored and reviewed, utilizing every opportunity for review at country, regional, and global levels. Meaningful civil society and youth participation is a critical enabler of successful SDG implementation and essential to effective global, regional, national, and subnational follow-up and review of the 2030 Agenda. Civil society plays a critical role in holding governments accountable for implementing the 2030 Agenda and for identifying gaps and lack of progress in achieving particular targets and for particular groups that are left behind. Our youth are given every opportunity to participate in the formulation of policies, laws, and programs that affect their lives. School forums nationwide have been critical to the socialization of the Sustainable Development Goals. Capacity building for the investment in effective data collection and data disaggregation are needed in order to identify whether groups are being left behind. Significant investments in and capacity building for data collection and analysis, especially in developing countries such as Samoa, are essential to be able to live up to commitment for disaggregation of data, to truly measure what is needed, and to make policy adjustments so as to ensure no one is left behind. In Samoa, there is emphasis on the importance of prioritization of those most in need or at most impacted by issues such as climate change and natural disasters. In terms of resilience and disaster risk reduction, equal importance is given to adaptation as well as mitigation through our National Adaptation Plan of Action and nationally assessed mitigation actions. The impacts of frequent cyclones through flooding has made it essential for a well-coordinated, multi-sectoral programmatic approach to flood mitigation and ensuring resilience of the communities most affected. At the sub-regional level, it is also important to note some of the developments that have materialized as of recent, including the Pacific Roadmap for Sustainable Development, the framework for the development of Pacific resilience and partnership arrangements, and the adoption of the Blue Pacific One Continent identity towards a common foreign policy on specific priority issues. ESCAP has worked jointly with the Pacific Islands Forum Secretariat in facilitating outreach for these sub-regional policies. I thank you for your attention. And moving on, I recognize the distinguished delegate from the Republic of Korea.
He's speaking, he's preparing.
Good afternoon. I'm Ingyum Kim from Statistics Korea in Republic of Korea. ESCAP asked Statistics Korea to speak about Korea's CRBS, civil registration, and vital statistics in session 2. But the plan was changed, so I'll do that in this session. I'll speak about Korea's civil registration and vital statistics, CRBS, policy example using a CRBS, and statistics importance. As we know, data statistics are included in the 5 means of implementation and partnership as the Asia-Pacific priority cooperation areas for achieving SDG. But many countries in the Asia-Pacific region are vulnerable to data and statistics. I know ESCAP engaged in technical cooperation activities for national statistical development under 4 regional initiatives: economic statistics, environmental statistics, civil registration and vital statistics, CRBS, and population and social statistics. So I would like to speak about Korea's CRBS and a policy example through the CRBS. The Statistics Korea is in charge of vital statistics based on civil registration. In other words, 13-digit resident registration number. The vital statistics of Korea consist of birth, death, marriage, and divorce. These statistics come from survey of Korean nationals residing in or outside Korea who reported their birth, death, marriage, divorce status. The vital statistics can play a key role as alert to inform us of problems such as low birth rate, aging, and increasing suicide rate. The recent issue among these problems is the increase of suicide rate in Korea. The suicide rate was 25.6% per 100,000 in 2016 and ranked first in OECD. This figure is 2.5 times the death rate of traffic accidents in Korea. This can be obtained from the death cause statistics, including 236 death causes. Recently, the Korean government recognized the seriousness of this suicide rate, and based on statistical analysis on the status of suicide, the Korean government is preparing a coordinated measure with relevant ministries, such as the Ministry of Health and Welfare, Ministry of Gender Equality and Family, and the NSO, and the others, as well as local governments. And the Korean government is trying to solve suicide problem by including prevention of suicide and spreading culture of respect for life. And the National Task Force, for the first time in its history, and is planning to reduce the suicide rate by 33.6% compared with the present until 2022. I hope this goal will be achieved, and an example of successful policy using CRBS in the future. Finally, I would like to speak about the importance of strengthening the statistical capacity. The degree of implementation of sustainable goals and targets is assessed through indicators. I think this shows that statistics are an important axis for implementing SDG as a basis for evidence-based decision making and accountability. Currently, the Statistics Korea is making efforts to improve the statistical capacity of producing high-quality, timely statistics at low cost by using new data sources and technologies such as administrative data and big data. And under the principle of SDG that no one left behind, we should help strengthen the statistical capacity of countries struggling to produce broad and detailed statistics continuously. Thank you.
Thank you, distinguished delegate from the Republic of Korea. And I will continue with stakeholder statements. Next, the consolidated statement of CSO delivered by Sulikwe Waga. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Sulik from the House of Chameleon, Fiji, and I'm from the LGBTIQ constituency of the Asia-Pacific CSO engagement mechanism, delivering the consolidated statement from the People's Forum. The Asia-Pacific Forum on Sustainable Development 2017 finally led to the adoption of the regional roadmap, negotiations on which had begun but could not be completed in 2016. The CSO community has expressed deep disappointment over the roadmap as it remains weak and misses the important tools to strengthen regional cooperation towards achieving the 2030 agenda. For example, it fails to include the important area of international trade. The roadmap also remains ineffective by being too general. However, the roadmap is not cast in stone, and we continue to believe in its potential to become an effective document that can guide regional cooperation, especially in terms of garnering critical means of implementation that developing and especially least developing countries in the region urgently need. In fact, without substantial progress on means of implementation, most developing and especially least developed countries will fall far short of desired levels of implementation. We hope this year that the roadmap will progress with agreement on some concrete deliverables in the fields of key monitoring of implementation. We urge member states to commit honestly and seriously to populate the regional roadmap with specific and useful instruments addressing some of the MOI needs of the region, for example, in the areas of ODA, illicit financial flows, trade, and technology. We are also disappointed our statement on means of implementation could not be read out, and we would like to submit our recommendations through the CSO consolidated statement that we'll submit officially and request to take our suggestions on board. We forward the following recommendations for the roadmap. We call on developed country governments in the region to increase their ODA spending, which has been declining if real ODA is calculated and exceeds the meager target of 0.7% of GDP, even with the most developed countries have not met. On trade, which is glaringly absent from the document, we advocate for a comprehensive SDG compatibility impact assessment of the trade and investment agreements in the region, which are increasingly in size and scope, with inputs from CSOs who can gather grassroots experiences from the ground as well as provide technical analysis. Such an assessment can also be conducted by national governments for particular SDGs that are of priority to them. For example, food security, industrialization and employment generation, provision of critical services, and so on. We would like to reiterate our recommendation that an open and participatory regional mechanism be set up that will evaluate the potential of environmental, gender, human rights, and socio-economic impacts of new and emerging technologies and assess the impact of the control and concentration of technologies for development and the resultant skewed benefits to the people who should be the recipients. There should also be a regional body to promote locally developed community-based technologies. The discussions on a regional tax forum seem to have got stalled. Given the huge loss to the region, especially from developing countries, in terms of illicit financial flows, we call upon member states to pursue these so that some form of regional cooperation can guarantee agreed norms to recover such potential revenues that can partially meet the financial needs of achieving the SDGs. The elimination of structural barriers is the basis of genuine sustainable development for the people in the region. There is a need to address the root causes of inequality, conflicts and wars, in forms of large-scale resources grabbing, corporate hegemony, militarism, neoliberalism, trade, and patriarchy and fundamentalisms in the region. I'm going to be adding soon, Madam Chair. The regional work on SDGs must not be disconnected from the work pursued in other fora, both by governments and civil society at global, regional, and national levels, for example, in fora involving rights of indigenous peoples, women farmers, workers, fisher folk, urban poor, LGBTIQ, people living with HIV and AIDS, young people, aging people, migrants, disabled, and Dalit populations. The regional cooperation work must connect to people's movements and campaigns on genuine issues that are very much part of the 2030 agenda. Achieving the SDGs will be impossible without acknowledging the linkage with people on the ground and issues close to their heart and lives. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sulik Waga. And I call upon the constituency group of youth constituency delivered by Reshma Thapa. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, fellow civil society members, namaste. I am making the statement on the behalf of youth constituency of the Asia Pacific CSO Regional Engagement Mechanism. I come from Nepal, where food insecurity, low basic education, completion rate, lack of social infrastructures, increased vulnerabilities to climate change-related disasters, lack of decent employment, even for educated youth like me, systematic barriers in implementation of SRHR laws, and deeply rooted gender inequality remain widespread. In the Preparatory Youth Forum, which was held earlier last week prior to APFSD, young people from across the Asia-Pacific region echoed those concerns. This was further resonated by women, workers, farmers, fisherfolk, indigenous people, migrants, people with disabilities, and people living with and affected by HIV, LGBTs at the Asia-Pacific People's Forum on Sustainable Development preceding this meeting. The regional roadmap adopted by member states have recognized the need to go beyond the business-as-usual policies, which we applaud. However, still missing within the roadmap is a means to address and overcome systematic and structural barriers and inequalities in a physical, ecological, economic, cultural, and social dimensions through a holistic frame, and should be centered around human rights, gender equality, equity, social inclusions, and justice and youth empowerment. The roadmap also ignores the importance of SDGs reporting mechanism, including VNR, to ensure that review and monitoring is wholesome and truly comprehensive. We urge you to bring together different sectors, alliances, and government ministries and engage the local communities at all levels to ensure cross-sectoral coherence in policies and programs, domestications of the indicators, efficient and transparent monitoring and accountability mechanism, and disaggregated data on the priority basis, and a truly transformative agenda for just, sustainable, resilient, and inclusive development in the Asia and the Pacific. We also urge you to address structural challenges, including the lack of public financing and allocation of budget at national levels, As someone from a least developing country, we are acutely aware of the needs to raise public financing for SDGs implementation. We call upon member states to revitalize the discussion of regional tax body in the region, one that can curb illicit financial flows and the race to the bottom tax incentives, redistribute wealth and free of resources to actually implement the 2030 agenda. Lastly, we would like to reiterate that youth constitute the largest population of the region, and in order to start a truly meaningful discourse on sustainable, resilient, and inclusive Asia-Pacific, we urge you to invest in youth-led and youth-serving CSOs and young people's movement in order to prepare them with all the needed capacities and opportunities to meaningfully engage with national, regional, and global SDGs implementation and follow up and review mechanism to make progress towards holistic and right-based sustainable development. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Thapa. And I will go back to country statements covering previous sessions. I would like to call upon Vietnam. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Vietnam strongly commit to implement sustainable development through the issuance of the strategic orientation of sustainable development in 2004. The sustainable development strategy for the periods of 2011 and 2020, and recently is the National Action Plan for implementation of the 2030 agenda. In fact, almost content of SDG has been considered and reflected in the priority area for sustainable development and specific law, strategy, and plans in Vietnam. It means that a significant part of SDG was and is being implemented through Vietnam development policies. Vietnam has a good institution mechanism for sustainable development, with National Council for Sustainable Development that is responsible for giving advice to Prime Minister on SDG implementation. Besides, we also have a Vietnam Business Council for Sustainable Development that play a vital role in attracting business community in SDG implementing in Vietnam. As a country will represent the Vienna in 2018, we consider that Vienna is not only a report, but also a process to get involvement of all stakeholders to join in and contribute, and it is also one of the ways to raise awareness of the community on the SDG in Vietnam. The preparatory process of Vienna started from last year with a broad participation from the public sector, international and national NGOs, social organizations, private sector, UN SDG groups in Vietnam, main group like women and youth. Our reports focus on analyzing policy gap and makes a recommendation for completing the policy to create enable environment to implement and achieve SDG in Vietnam. The reports also highlight that mainstreaming SDG into national, sectoral, and local policy is the most sufficient way to implementing SDG in Vietnam, as well as find out the linkage among the goals by practical example. The main challenges in implementing SDG also defined in the report with recommendation to overcome these challenges. The report has a brief evaluation on the achievement of 17 goals with deeper review on the goals 6, 7, 11, 12, and 15. At the moment, the second draft was formulated with quite a lot of information regarding 17 goals. So the next step is to select the key messages and show the voice of some vulnerable groups in the highlight point in the report. Actually, development of Vienna is one of the important tasks in our National Action Plan on the 2030 agenda. After nearly 1 year of implementation of the National Action Plan, we recognize that the most challenges for us are financial resources, mobilization for SDG, gets participation of all stakeholders, especially the most vulnerable groups, and affordable data for monitoring and evaluating SDG. So we hope that UN ESCAP will take leads to help countries in the region to overcome these challenges. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, distinguished delegate from Vietnam. I will now give the floor to the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Thank you. In the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful, Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to acknowledge the UN ESCAP for placing emphasis on the implementation of SDGs as a core theme of this forum. Undoubtedly, national sustainable development implementation measures ranging from local to global scales will be significant and valuable in terms of contributing to the attainment of the SDGs and global sustainability. It is now well known that different dimensions of sustainable development have strong interlinkages. Sustainability is a moving target that requires balanced progress towards socioeconomic growth and environmental integrity goals. The nature and interdependency of these goals requires joint cooperative actions and participation by all stakeholders, including governments, private sectors, NGOs, and local communities, among others. The Islamic Republic of Iran follows its plans and programs based on integrative approaches in line with the National Development Outlook document, religious beliefs, and socioeconomic values. We have set our planning agendas in the context of the implementation of SDGs based on our national priorities and provisions of our National Development Outlook. At a critical first step, the government of Islamic Republic of Iran designated ministries and other government bodies and organizations responsible for guidance and leadership of one or more SDGs, while synergizing the attainment of the goals with the country's priorities related to balanced growth and development, recognizing the unfair sanctions and international political pressure that have taught us to be more resilient and independent. Madam Chair, Iran, like many other countries, has incorporated sustainable development elements in its legal system and frameworks. Our national outlook is prepared and approved at the highest level of the country's decision-making. This document includes different aspects of sustainable development, and its goals and policies comply with other targets and indicators of the SDGs, including health, well-being, food security, social security, family empowerment, poverty and corruption alleviation, enjoyment of good environment, investment rates, employment growth, inflation control, and cultural, education, and research growth. Therefore, all the national sustainable development policies and programs are oriented towards achieving these goals in a variety of economic, social, and environmental contexts. The national development plans in Iran are important instruments for promoting and improving the goals and targets of sustainable development, the economic and social status, and maintaining environmental sustainability. These 5-year plans identify orientations, policies, programs, and financial mechanisms to advance the national economic, social, and environmental development goals. Heretofore, 5 5-year development plans have been implemented in Iran, and the recent and the 6th 5-year plan has been prepared on the basis of gained experiences in the past and the challenges faced. Considering that the preparation of the mentioned plan was aligned with sustainable development goals that are in line with our national interests, it attempted to meet the priorities and internal laws, goals, targets, and indicators for sustainable development goals in national policies and programs in different areas. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to emphasize the opportunities and challenges associated with adopting a sustainable development approach based on the nexus between food, energy, and water as 3 vital elements of development and prosperity. We are currently experiencing one of the worst droughts in our recent history, and water scarcity is a strong threat to our food security in our region, with significant socioeconomic implications that will be exacerbated by climate variability and change. As a result of these growing concerns, the energy production and consumption landscape is also expected to change in preparation to addressing food and water security issues. With no doubt, my government remains committed to providing full support for the successful implementation of sustainable development goals that are in line with our national interest and help to move forward toward global and regional peace, security, and sustainability. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, Iran. We'll move on now and now give the floor to Cambodia.
Thank you, Madam Chair, government representative, and participant. Cambodia has started our progress of SDG localization soon after the United Nations endorsed 2030 Development Agenda in September 2015. Since during General Assembly in September 2015, the Royal Government of Cambodia has requested to add another goal of mine clearance and explosive remnant to help our people and improve living status. In the progress of localization, Cambodia has involved with all stakeholders such as government, development partner, CSO, and subnational authority, which we can evaluate. Cambodia fully respects broad participation and consultation approach, but private sector was not included. Cambodia has experience in achieving more MDG and been selected by the United Nations as the pilot country in achieving more MDG, so may not difficult for Cambodia in achieving SDG. Another important that Cambodia would like to share at this occasion, based on the rapid integrated assessment by UNDP regional before we start localization process, we're standing at more than 70% in terms of policy and strategy in place. So it remains around 20% of that is the gap for us to be more in SDG for localization. Cambodia government just endorsed CSDG framework with 18 goals, and now we on the process of integrating into the new National Strategic Development Plan for 2019 to 2023 for implementation. To get more resources for achieving our target in 2030, the government was include private sector in the process of the NSDP formulation. Cambodia government going to register for VNR in 2019. Again, Cambodia would like to express our sincere thanks to all partners who provide support to Cambodia for achieving last CMDG and request for continuing support to Cambodia and countries in the region to achieve SDG in 2013 through technical and financial support, which will finally leave no one behind. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Cambodia. And I now call upon China.
谢谢主席女士。主席女士，各位同事，中国高度重视落实可持续发展议程，将落实工作同国家中长期发展战略有机结合，建立了跨部门的协调机制，监督落实进展。中国秉承创新、协调、绿色、开放、共享的发展理念，通过战略对接、制度保障、社会动员、资源投入、风险防控、国际合作、监督评估等综合手段，将可持续发展目标融入各行业的发展规划。目前，中国经济运行稳中向好， 对全球经济增长的贡献率超30%，发展质量和发展效益明显提高，大众创业、万众创新蓬勃发展，新兴产业迅猛增长，基础设施网络进一步完善，发展新动能不断增强。与此同时，中国绿色发展全面推进，生态环境得到迅速改善，单位国内生产总值能耗和二氧化碳排放量持续下降。中国深入实施大气、水、土壤污染的综合治理，大力强化环境监督执法，实施生态文明建设目标评估评价考核办法。上述成就展示了中国落实2030议程的部分早期收获。主席女士，中国国家主席习近平提出构建人类命运共同体的主张，中国愿本着共商、共建、共享的全球治理理念，加强与国际社会的交流与合作，共同推进可持续发展议程的全面实施，不让一个人掉队。谢谢。
Thank you, China. May I ask, are there any other governments who wish to speak before I open the floor to other organizations and stakeholders? I recognize representative from India. And then Singapore.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for giving me an opportunity to speak on behalf of my country, India, in this session on national perspectives and progress through the lens of voluntary national review. India presented its first voluntary national reviews report on implementation of Sustainable Development Goals on 19th July 2017 at HLPF. I would like to share salient features of the India-Myanmar as well as some of our experiences connected with it. As part of its oversight responsibility, Niti Aayog, that is National Institute for Transforming India, which is a national think tank, led the process of VNR. A multidisciplinary task force was constituted to coordinate the review, program implementation data on interventions by the central ministries and sub-national governments were analyzed. Various perspectives and observations emerging from the national and sub-national consultations on SDGs were also analyzed. Data from the authentic and credible sources were used for the review. Efforts of the Indian legislature to further the SDG agenda was discussed in the Voluntary National Review report. The lower house of parliament held sensitization workshops for parliamentarians from both the houses. It also organized the National Women's Legislator Conference, Second BRICS Women Parliamentary Forum, and South Asian Speakers Summit. The lower house of parliament and sub-national legislators are also discussing issues of SDGs in their sessions. Their efforts strengthened legislative oversight of the Sustainable Development Goals. The Voluntary National Review highlighted the actions taken on strength, cooperative and competitive federalism. The role of sub-national governments in SDG implementation and national policy making were analyzed. Since development programs implemented by the central ministries and sub-national governments directly contributed to the progress of SDGs, the VNR analyzed them in terms of alignment to the SDGs outreach and impact. A noteworthy example is the Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana, arguably the world's largest financial inclusion program, which has led to the opening of 310 million new accounts and cumulative deposit of Indian rupees 739 billion. In terms of the US dollars, comes to about 11.5 billion. The Voluntary National Review looked closely at the issues of social inclusion. Results of special programs for socially economically disadvantaged groups like women, children, scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, communities were analyzed. Multi-stakeholder consultation led to the crystallization of opinions and perspectives among the non-state actors like civil society organizations, business and industry sector. They reflected on their positioning and contributions of various SDGs. The VNR had considerable salutary impact on program implementation insofar as development schemes, initiatives now increasingly factor in SDGs irrespective of the sector. This is a very positive development going forward. And lastly, the VNR was indeed a catalyst for implementation of SDGs in India, and I am sure countries representing their voluntary national reviews in 2018, HLPF will have similar experience. Before I conclude, I would like to convey our appreciations for the support of UN, including ESCAP, for the VNR process. The preparatory workshops conducted by the UN at the global and regional levels were very useful. I thank you, Chair, once again for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you, India. And I now call upon the delegate from Singapore.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a key message from Singapore as we undertake our very first VNR at this year's HLPF. Sustainable development has been an integral part of Singapore's development history since independence. Our journey towards becoming a livable and sustainable city began in the 1960s. As a small city-state with limited land and no natural resources, we appreciate well the challenges of sustainable development. In this regard, our policies have always been designed with sustainability in mind, and they are geared broadly towards accomplishing the 17 SDGs. Today, we are ranked the most sustainable city in Asia and second in the world, according to the Sustainable Cities Index 2016. Singapore will undertake our first VNR this year. Preparations are currently underway, but we have begun to learn some key lessons already. One very important takeaway is the need to situate the VNR vis-à-vis sustainable development. The VNR is the way station in our journey towards sustainable development. It is an opportunity for us to take stock of our SDG implementation. However, it has become increasingly apparent to us that the 2030 agenda should be viewed as a work in progress. This is the key to its success. Implementing the SDGs should not and does not end with the HLPF. Sustainability is a long-term journey. In order to accomplish this, we've learned that the support of the entire government is actually necessary. Working with our VNR through an interagency process has accorded us with the opportunity to internalize the 2030 agenda amongst our agencies and engender a sense of ownership within government. Our longer-term objective is for our officials to view sustainable development as a constant factor underpinning policy making. In addition, this also encourages them to work together to address the interlinkages, which, as we've heard, has become very, very crucial for SDG success. Second, in adopting a long-term approach, we must first acknowledge that there is no one-size-fits-all approach to achieving the SDGs, and no country or stakeholder has the monopoly of knowledge on this matter. The implementation of the 2030 agenda should be a continuous process, but not a top-down one. As such, our countries should be free to pursue these goals in the manner they choose, taking into account the national circumstances and priorities. For instance, in Singapore's experience, while there are many targets which apply to us, there are some which do not apply at all. For example, we do not have an agricultural sector, and neither do we have local governments. We should not compromise on the effective implementation of the 2030 agenda for the sake of a uniform standard. In addition, governments alone do not have the wherewithal to implement the SDGs effectively. In this regard, when it comes to stakeholders, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. The long-term viability of the SDGs requires each and every member of the community to have a voice and a stake in implementing them. Whether NGOs, academia, youth, or even the private sector, we have much to learn from each other. Finally, as a country about to undertake our VNR, I should stress that we are not just here to learn about what makes a good report or presentation. This forum creates opportunities for us to learn about the experiences of other countries, a space to share our own best practices, and also our views with each other. It is a catalyst for identifying gaps and challenges and opportunities in sustainable development. And for that, I would like to thank the UN system and ESCAP for giving us this opportunity today. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Singapore. I will now give the floor to Sri Lanka.
Thank you, Chair. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, the government of Sri Lanka has expressed its interest to present its first voluntary national review at the high-level political forum in July 2018. The Sri Lanka VNR will assess the progress of national policies and systems and document the progress of the country towards implementing and achieving SDGs. It will be prepared in line with the UNSG's VNR guidelines. Having noted that SDGs present an overarching and comprehensive framework that aims to provide a shared narrative of sustainable development, emphasizing the principle of leaving no one behind. The Sri Lanka VNR process is envisaged as a collaborative and inclusive exercise that provides a comprehensive and detailed understanding of Sri Lanka's current status and progress with respect to SDGs and successes and challenges in achieving them. Discuss initiatives taken to mainstream SDGs in Sri Lanka. Identify gaps in policies, plans, resources, and institutional capacities, and outlines the steps need to be taken to enhance the implementation of the 2030 agenda. The Sri Lanka VNR employs a mix of quantitative and qualitative methods for data collection and analysis to allow for optimum reflection and evaluation. As such, both secondary data collection tools as well as primary data collection tools, such as stakeholder consultations and key informant interviews, are used to gather information. The policy documents are reviewed employing the rapid integrated assessment tool in order to analyze the SDG alignment in the national policy outlook and the existing gaps in the national policy framework. In addition, other relevant sectoral policy documents and statistical information are reviewed to evaluate the progress and the status of all 17 SDGs. The VNR aims at examining the trends, successes, challenges, and lessons learned. The Sri Lanka VNR process is envisaged as a collaborative and inclusive endeavor leading to sustained multi-stakeholder engagement and dialogue. As such, the report expects to incorporate and synthesize inputs and needs from all stakeholders, including government, private sector, academia, and CSOs. To this end, a stakeholder engagement plan was designed with the assistance and guidance from ESCAP with two major aims. Firstly, to consult all stakeholders involved in the SDG process in the country to get inputs for the preparation of the VNR as well as to raise awareness. Secondly, to set up the platform for continuous stakeholder engagement in the post-2018 VNR period. Once the first draft on the VNR is finalized, a validation workshop will be held in order to create greater ownership. This workshop will attempt to bring together the stakeholders who participated in the previous workshop as well. By this way, we have undertaken a participatory and transparent VNR process. Let me wind up thanking ESCAP and UN Office in Sri Lanka for the technical and financial support given to make Sri Lanka VNR process a success. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I will now continue with international governmental organizations, and I wish to call upon the International Union for Conservation of Nature. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, Madam Chair. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, this year marks the 70th anniversary of IUCN as a unique network of governments, NGO, and indigenous peoples organizations with 7 decades of experience in nature conservation. As you are aware, nature is critical for sustainable development. On the one hand, it is to be protected for its intrinsic value, and on the other hand, it provides cost-effective solutions for societal challenges. Work on SDG 15 can guarantee that the foundation of life on this planet is secured and that such solutions can be mobilized. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, IUCN is ready to work with IUCN state members, other governments, and other stakeholders in the Asia-Pacific region to assess progress against all SDG 15 indicators, including those for which IUCN is the official custodian, namely Indicator 15.5.1 Red List Index, Indicators 15.1.2 and 15.4.1 related to protected area coverage, and Indicator 15.8.1 related to invasive alien species. IUCN Asia Regional Secretariat Office has been helping countries to build capacity to use the IUCN Red List criteria and categories, for example, in Bangladesh, Bhutan, and Myanmar. IUCN Asia Regional Office also plays the secretariat function for a unique initiative supported by the Ministry of Environment, Japan, and now supported by Ministry of Environment, Republic of Korea, called the Asia Protected Areas Partnership, which is an intergovernmental and multi-stakeholder platform of Asian countries for sharing experiences and best practices for effective management of protected areas, including promoting regional collaboration on protected areas management, and also recognizing the traditional and spiritual significance of protected areas. Protected areas are an essential conservation tool which can contribute to healthy ecosystems and thereby enable nature-based solutions for some societal challenges in cities and urban areas linked to water and food security, climate change, and health. Bond Challenge and the progress towards achieving country-level pledges have been increasingly called for as a key enabler to achieving SDG 15, a target related to forest landscape restoration. IUCN, along with the government of Germany, has been leading the establishment and development of the Bond Challenge and has been a forerunner in demonstrating national and subnational country application of forest landscape restoration. In Asia alone, 23.9 million hectares of degraded land is pledged towards the Bond Challenge. We are pleased to mention that a number of countries in the region, including Pakistan, are showing significant progress towards achieving the Bond Challenge, and we look forward to working with a number of other countries on the Bond Challenge. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. I will now continue, and I call upon the UN agencies, UNFPA.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and Talofa Excellencies, distinguished delegates. Transformation towards sustainable and resilient societies, the theme of the high-level political forum on sustainable development at the UN in July, perfectly complements the 2030 Agenda, underpinned by its 17 Sustainable Development Goals. This week's 5th Asia-Pacific Forum on Sustainable Development offers all of us, governments, civil society, the UN family alike, an opportunity to take stock of the progress being made in our region and to confront the challenges that remain. For the United Nations Population Fund, UNFPA, fully achieving the SDGs means fully achieving the 3 transformational results articulated in our new strategic plan: 0 maternal deaths, 0 unmet need for family planning, and 0 gender-based violence and other harmful practices against women and girls. These transformational results contribute to a world where every pregnancy is wanted, every childbirth is safe, and every young person's potential is fulfilled. UNFPA's overarching vision, inspired by the ICPD Programme of Action, which serves as the foundation of all that we do, a mandate all more crucial as we traverse the road to 2030. Let us be clear, societies simply cannot be resilient and sustainable if women's and young people's dignity, health, and well-being, including their sexual and reproductive health and reproductive rights, are not promoted, protected, and fulfilled. What do resilience and sustainability look like from the perspective of the adolescent girl of today who will have transitioned into adulthood by 2030? Access to education, including comprehensive sexuality education, access to health information and services, including sexual and reproductive health, decent employment opportunities with women on par with men. In other words, allowing the largest generation of youth ever to fulfill their aspirations with good education, good health, and good employment in an atmosphere of peace and justice, where girls decide to marry and have children according to their choice. Creating this foundation for life also enables countries to better prepare for and address aging populations, a demographic shift being manifested more and more across our region. All of this is connected, a circle of life whose components cannot be viewed in isolation but must be addressed as a whole. The 2030 Agenda ultimately envisaged leaving nobody behind, reaching the furthest behind first. This places an emphasis on women, girls, and young people, who are disproportionately impacted by disasters increasingly fueled by climate change, as well as conflict, situations that are experienced with growing frequency in our region. On a related note, Asia-Pacific is witnessing urbanisation on an unprecedented scale. This, on one hand, offers an opportunity for improving health, education, and women and girls' empowerment. But on the other hand, the face of inequality is increasingly an urban one, where millions grapple with extreme poverty, marginalisation, and outright exclusion. Under Goal 17, participation is essential for sustainability and resilience, including participation by women, young people, human rights defenders, indigenous populations, rural inhabitants, all of whom are among the most vulnerable. Goal 17, whose achievement is achieving all of the SDGs, is a cornerstone of the entire 2030 agenda. Formidable challenges, all of these, but amazing opportunities for all of us to work together on many fronts to convert rhetoric into action through the roadmap to bring about a sustainable and resilient Asia-Pacific region. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative of UNFPA. I now give the floor to UN Habitat.
Madam Chair, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, thank you for a chance for this intervention to make a brief statement on behalf of United Nations Human Settlement Program, or UN Habitat. We regard SDG 11 that makes cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, sustainable, critically important in view of the opportunities and threat urbanization present to our society now. SDG 11 is also important in the context of localization of not only SDGs, but also other global agendas, such as New Urban Agenda, and Sendai Framework for DRR, Disaster Risk Reduction, Paris Climate Agreement, and Addis Ababa Agenda for Action on Financing Sustainable Development. The New Urban Agenda supports implementation of all global agendas, given the multidisciplinary nature of urbanization. In this regard, UN Habitat has produced tools and guidelines to support member states, local governments, and other partners to localize these global agendas. For example, the international guidelines on urban and territorial planning, various land tools, and city profiling for disaster risk reduction and management provide specific guidance. In such a context, we express our immense gratitude to the government of Malaysia for hosting the 9th session of World Urban Forum early February, promoting a common vision on sustainable urban development through Kuala Lumpur Declaration. We humbly thank so many delegates from Asia-Pacific countries, many UN and other organizations for their participation, strong support, and great contribution. Mandated by New Urban Agenda, the first quadrennial report is due to be submitted in early April to the Office of UN Secretary General and UN ECOSOC for their review and onward transmission to the General Assembly. This process is aligned with the high-level political forum in New York in July. It tries to capture, among other areas, progress made on the implementation of New Urban Agenda, best practices, emerging trends and issues. The report also suggests the process for preparation of the subsequent quadrennial report envisaged in the New Urban Agenda. Recognizing the necessity to build capacity in consolidating databases, definitions, and methodologies to improve monitoring and reporting on the relevant SDGs and the New Urban Agenda, UN ESCAP and UN Habitat are jointly organizing a regional workshop on human settlement indicators this week in this building. Finally, UN Habitat would like to continue to work very closely with member countries, UN agencies, and various partners to further enhance sustainable cities and communities in Asia and the Pacific region and beyond. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. And due to the interest of time, I will take no more statements. And I wish to thank you all for those insightful and interesting remarks. I would now like to give Mr. Sahedi the opportunity to react.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'll be extremely brief, mainly to thank the member states and the stakeholders for offering us an array of examples of progress. And I think that clearly, as one said, the implementation of the regional roadmap is, along with the SDGs themselves, is a work in progress. That clearly comes out. There are some rich examples of achievements across different sectors. There is obviously a need now to take those and to scale them up. Progress is happening, but maybe not at the scale and the speed that's needed. Accelerating progress is going to be, in a way, fueled by better data, which you mentioned, greater finance, deeper partnerships, and in all of this, of course, ESCAP stands ready to work with partner UN agencies and to support our member states. We also remain very committed to hearing from you in terms of how to organize this review of the implementation of the roadmap as the years go by, so that we can make it a real good stock-taking of our region's progress on implementation of the regional elements of the 2030 agenda. And last but not least, I would like to express the Secretariat's gratitude to those countries and partners who mentioned work with us, and we're very thankful when the work is good enough to be mentioned and appreciated. So thank you for that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sahedi. And thank you for all contributions and for an excellent session. We will now have a 5-minute break to allow the Secretariat to prepare the podium for the next session. Please do not leave the room.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I kindly invite the panelists for session 7 to make their way to the stage and take their seat on the sofas. While we wait for everyone to take their seats, I'd like to take the opportunity to invite all participants to join us for the launch of the Guidelines for Multi-Stakeholder Partnerships to implement the 2030 Agenda in Asia and the Pacific, developed by UNU and ESCAP. The guidelines will be launched after the last session of the day, around 5:15, in the theatre on the ground floor of the conference centre, followed by a partnering cocktail reception. This will be an opportunity to learn more about the step-by-step guide, to share your stories and foster new partnerships over refreshments. We hope to see you there.
This announcement, this is serious. This is serious, it's not a joke. So there is the delegate from North Korea who left his bag in the reception, in the ground floor. And security is very upset. He said North Korea, so please ask, can the delegate of North Korea come to here because he left a bag?
Is he in the room?
I don't know, did not explode? Let me see it.
No, I won't.
Why not?
Because you're terrible and you need to
Check. You spoke to me Timor-Leste.
Check. 1 2 shake 1 2 shake 1 2 shake 1 2 shake.
Thank you for your patience. We will now continue with session 7. Kindly return to your seats and ensure that your phones are turned off. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Excellencies, distinguished delegates. Welcome to the 7th session of the 5th Asia-Pacific Forum on Sustainable Development, which forms part of Agenda Item 3, strengthening the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. This session will provide space for different stakeholders to discuss challenges and opportunities for building effective partnerships in support of the implementation of the 2030 Agenda. It will be moderated by Mr. Kazuhiko Takamoto, Director of United Nations University Institute for Advanced Study of Sustainability. Mr. Takamoto, may I now kindly ask Mr. Kazuhiko to assume the moderation of the panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Let us start session 7, beginning with our panel discussion. For this session, we are going to adopt an alternative format for the panel discussions. We will base our discussions on a hypothetical scenario so that the need for effective and transformative partnership can be emphasized. Before sharing this hypothetical scenario, I would like to introduce our distinguished panelists here. To my far left, Ms. Orakanoge Pandaksa from the Thailand, former co-chair of Global Young Academy Thailand. Next to her, Mr. Toili Kurbanov, UNV Deputy Executive Coordinator for Management Services. Then Ms. Ulans Gombosulem, Mongolia, as a representative of civil society. Welcome. To my immediate right, Honorable Mr. Kinli Dorji, Mayor of Thimphu, Bhutan. Then Mr. Ashif Ibrahim, Vice Chairman, New Age Group of Industries, EBAC Executive Director. Thank you for all the panelists for joining today's panel discussion in this afternoon. Now, let me present today's hypothetical crisis scenario, which was prepared by the Secretariat for our panel discussion. The hypothetical scenario is as follows. Scientists have published a new regional study of pollution that has been widely covered in the media and has caused major alarm and discussion among the citizens and in the policymaker circles. The article notes the following 3 serious concerns. Concern number 1, premature death from pollution will rise dramatically, especially among vulnerable groups. This will present an enormous burden on most countries' health systems. Concern number 2, the rapidly increasing pollution of waterways and oceans, which will lead to loss of biodiversity, including significant fish kills. Most commercially important fish types are predicted to become extinct within the next 10 years. Concern number 3, if pollution levels become overwhelming, there is concern from massive social unrest directed mainly at the producers and at the government. This would likely result in political instability and disruptions in supply chains and production at the high economic cost. There are three concerns. This is just the hypothetical scenario for our panel discussion to make our discussion smoothly. Now, having said that, let me invite the first speaker from our panel, Honorable Mayor Dorji. Could you please share with us your perspective and observation toward identifying possible solutions as a political leader at the local level? Please, Honorable Mayor, please.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, Honorable Chair, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to participate. When we discuss about pollution, this subject is kind of very new to Bhutan. We have always been portraying that Bhutan is carbon negative. We do not have much pollution, and we absorb carbon from other countries who are polluting greenhouse gas emissions in the nearby countries. From that perspective, we do not really have serious health issues currently, but we cannot be complacent. We have our own challenges. We, at the city level, we do definitely look at greenhouse gas emissions that we produce in the process of development. First and foremost, proper management of waste. I think solid waste can, if not properly managed at the landfill, can generate methane gas. Similarly, wastewater, if not properly treated, can produce so much of greenhouse gas. Besides this, the Bhutan's challenge of today is the increasing number of cars. So transportation is one of the sector which is emitting maximum greenhouse gases. So we are definitely not being complacent. We need to tackle these issues so that in the long run, the health and happiness of our people are not compromised. So from that angle, I'm here to assure that at our local level, we have been, with whatever resources that we have, we are trying our best to manage our waste properly and also to handle the transport sector. We have been very closely working with the central government as well as the donors to improve our public transportation. If we have enough buses plying, I'm sure people will not want to travel by their private cars and stuck in the traffic jam. If we have enough public transport buses plying, I'm sure everybody will want to avail, and then congestion will be resolved. Ultimately, taking care of our pollution, and definitely Bhutan wants to be more carbon negative. We do not want to add to the greenhouse gas emissions that the world is grappling with today. So with these few words, I wish every member country to pursue similar footsteps so that climate change, global warming issues are taken care of. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor, Honorable Mayor, for sharing your current issues you are facing, not only pollution, but also the global environmental issues. And you have touched on very important, the working together, other sectors, as well as the government and the international community. We can come back to you later after the getting observation from other panelists. Now, let me invite the next speaker from our panel. My left-hand side, the Ms. Gomboslen. Could you please share with us your perspective from the viewpoint of civil society, which you are now fully engaged, please?
Thank you very much. And this is actually a very big opportunity for me, and I'm very honored to be here. And I represent Mongolian National Civil Society Organization, Center for Human Rights and Development. And I also represent here APFSD, which is the Asia Pacific Civil Society mechanism engaging on SDG forum. So when pollution of air, water, and soil takes place, it will affect many systems and sectors of society. It will affect health sector, social security system, including health insurance, livelihood of local population, family well-being. The burden of women's care of children, elder, sick family members will be increased. When heavy metal contaminates water and soil pollution from irresponsible business activities or, for example, mining companies, then food and agriculture systems will be destroyed in the affected area, and it will hit small local food producers, small farmers and herders, because heavy metals in water and soil will penetrate into food chain, and this is a very few to name. And in terms of health risk, of course, we may name many groups as vulnerable, including young children, old people, pregnant women, people with disabilities, and just a few to name. Just a few to name. And however, defining vulnerable groups should be done very thoroughly in spirit of leaving no one behind, because vulnerable groups are very different depending on the local situation, geographical location, etc. And take, for example, people with disabilities. There is need to look at specific needs which are very different for blind people, for people with wheelchair, or people with loss of hearing. How to reach people with loss of hearing to deliver urgent alert on contamination, for example. Let's take elder people, how to provide them with available, accessible, and affordable healthcare service. Another critical issue is violation of human rights of affected communities, and risk of those who try to raise awareness on human rights violations to seek of protection for environmental human rights of affected communities. They are environmental defenders, indigenous communities representatives, and journalists who demand accountability from business actors or government officials. Many of environmental defenders nowadays suffer with their freedom. They are harassed, attacked, imprisoned, and killed. They have no recognition and protection in our countries. This also shows the need of an effective coordination mechanism in countries at the local and national levels to meet the need of integrated approach of SDGs to ensure the fundamental human rights of people, vulnerable communities who will be severely affected by such scenario. Unfortunately, this coordination mechanism lacks or needs to be improved in our countries.
Thank you, Ms. Gombo Suren, for your remarks, which has covered the wide range of very important element, including water pollution relating to health effect, which has covering the vulnerable group, including children. At the same time, the human rights as well as the coordination should be improved. This is the very important dimension and element for this the panel should be addressed in this afternoon. Thank you very much once again. Now, let me invite next speaker, Mr. Ibrahim. Could you please provide us with your perspective from viewpoint of business sector which you are engaged? Mr. Ibrahim, you have the floor, please.
Thank you very much, sir. In Bangladesh is a developing economy. We have just received the recognition that we are not going to be an LDC anymore, so the progression is underway. And that obviously comes with a lot of industrialization. And of course, that means water pollution, Bangladesh being one of the leading manufacturers and exporters of ready-made garments and textiles. It plays a very significant role in our economy, and we have lots of textile factories who not necessarily, when they started off with, were very compliant in terms of effluent treatment plants and other things. However, what I would like to say is very recently the Bangladesh government as well as the private sector and the development partners have understood that climate change issues need to be addressed seriously, and a lot of projects have taken place with the joint, since the topic of our session is partnerships. A lot of partnerships have taken place together and has come up with concrete projects dealing with this issue. For example, to address the issue of water pollution, there is a project called Partnership for Cleaner Textiles, which is by IFC, and it is also partnered with the Clothing Manufacturers Association of Bangladesh. And the Ministry of Government, Ministry of Environment is giving support to that project. So these kind of partnerships are working, and we are sitting down every 6 months and identifying and quantifying the amount of water that has been cleaned through this project. So I think this is an initiative that can be followed by other member countries. In terms of another project which is very significant, in the middle of the city, we had tanneries. All the tanneries were located in an area of Rayar Bazaar, which is very center of the city, and it was polluting the main river, Buriganga, which is one of the main rivers, which is right next to Dhaka city, the main river. And an initiative was taken where the entire tanneries from the city were relocated to an industrial zone with effluent treatment plants. That is where the Ministry of Industries took a very strong initiative, along with the Manufacturers Association and the donor community. So these kind of partnerships are really helping get the momentum together in terms of addressing the issues of pollution. I can come back later and tell you more about it, but at this outset, let me just stop there.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Gurbanov. In your country, including the capital areas, you have touched on the importance of partnership among the private sector and the national and the local authorities, as well as you have also touched on the current situation in the rivers in Dhaka. And we are going to get back to you later for your further insightful suggestions. Now, let me move on to next speaker, Mr. Gurbanov, who is from the UNV. Could you please share with us your thought from the viewpoint of UNV? Please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Takimoto-san. I'm afraid that after exciting examples that were shared by the member states and civil society representatives, mine might be slightly boring, because I would speak more to the process perspective. I have generally 5 points to suggest for the distinguished audience. You had mentioned in the hypothetical case, Mr. Chair, the pollution case scenario, and the possibility of the social unrest and political instability as a result of wide dissemination of the latest study. So the point number one, Mr. Chair and ladies and gentlemen, is that for that kind of a problem, there won't be a solution overnight. There has to be a process. In some instances, the process will take longer, in others it will take shorter, but there has to be a process whereby the parties will come to a solution. Social unrest is not a solution, and it is not a process. Through social unrest, parties will not be able to resolve the problem, let alone for political instability. So the point number one is that all the parties need to take a moment and conceive a process whereby they will achieve a solution in this hypothetical case. Second, ladies and gentlemen, related point is that in many instances, the process is likely to be long-term. Hopefully there will be short-term solutions, but in many instances it is unlikely that there will be short-term solutions. So one has to have a long-term perspective on how parties can come to really sustainable, effective solution. One needs to take into account a long-term vision and then planned practical milestones that check the progress as to whether in the process of arriving to the solution to the pollution problem, we are indeed making any progress. The process has to be very clear and transparent and understood by the society. especially in instances when there is a real possibility of a social unrest, as was highlighted by Mr. Chair in the example. It has to be long-term, but it also has to offer quick wins, because the social awareness as a result of the publication of the latest study, ladies and gentlemen, in this example, is creating certain momentum. But the momentum will soon fizzle out. The life will take its course. The momentum will be lost. So there has to be a long-term process and at the same time, quick win approach whereby we have some concrete, tangible changes in the shorter run. Third point is that the process needs to be inclusive. And inclusive was one of the key words of this forum in particular. We know, ladies and gentlemen, and it was mentioned by a number of delegates, that development process is inherently political, always. But it doesn't need to be unnecessarily politicized. And in the cases such as this, the pollution-related cases, there is going to be a lot of vested interests, whether we like it or not. So therefore, the only way to avoid politicization of the solution is to have the process as inclusive as possible, to represent all the parties, the governments at all levels, from the national level all the way to the local municipalities, the civil societies representing different constituency, and the business. So it has to be inclusive, and the parties will have to find the courage to sit at the table, however they dislike each other's argument, to come to a common solution. So that would, I might suggest, ladies and gentlemen, as the third pertinent point in relation to the process. Now, fourth, and I said I had 5, so 2 more. Fourth, on the pollution cases, we know this is no longer a siloed environmental issue. This is the issue, especially in our rapidly developing region, that is making or breaking the development. Distinguished representative from Bangladesh spoke about concrete example, how rapid industrialization of Bangladesh, creating implications for the environmental sustainability. So pollution cases are not fringe issues, are not siloed issues. These are the development issues. And therefore, it is important that the leaders speak to it. And the leaders does not mean heads of states or heads of governments or the ministers. It also means other people who have the position of informal authority, moral authority in the society, whether it's athletes, the celebrity figures. And in many cases, because I work for the United Nations volunteers, we can speak from experience. In many cases, the volunteers are the leaders, because they're usually at the front line of the response to the pollution cases in their communities. So there are leaders at all levels, and it is important that leaders own up the responsibility and speak to the issue, not as an environmental issue, not as a standalone, isolated issue, but as something that is having long-term implications for the long-term sustainable development of our nations. And the last and the fifth point, another point mentioned in the discussions at the forum, is data. Because if we're coming to that solution process without the data, then the process will end up us pumping hot air. It will not lead to any solutions. It is important that all the parties, protagonists, antagonists, speak with data. As somebody said, in God we trust, but everybody else comes with their own data. So it is important that discussions in the process are evidence-based and informed by the data. And yet again, on this point, we believe that the community is playing an important role, because communities can generate the data, in particular the volunteers in the communities, they can generate the data about the impact of the pollution and the long-term environmental sustainability. In summary, Mr. Chair, I would dare to say there's 5 key points that would need to be considered in this case. A, there needs to be a process. B, the process will probably be long-term, but it has to generate some short-term quick wins. 3, it has to be inclusive. 4, it has to be seen as a development issue, and therefore leaders must speak to it. And last, data is very, very important. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kurbanov. It is well organized. It is very clear message focusing on process and consisting of 5 element dimension. It is very important to note. In particular, to me, the long-term perspective, it is very important to think about. Data-based as well as development dimension should be taken into account. Of course, these 5 elements and should be taken into our further consideration for our discussion in this afternoon. Thank you once again, Mr. Kurbanov, for your insightful suggestions and remarks. Now, let me invite the first round, the last speaker, Ms. Pandaksa. Could you please provide us with your perspective from the viewpoint of the next generation, as well as the think tank which you are working on, please?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, delighted to be here, and thank you for the ESCAP for allowing me to represent the Global of Young Academies. It is a pool of young scientists from 77 countries, altogether 200 top young scientists. I would like to echo Mr. Kurbanov's point that data is important, and who could come with the support of data if not scientists? And the pollution issue has been around. It's also important for everyone to help promoting the transparency of both good practice and bad practice. Because to identify what are the bad practice, it would help us to help indicate what next should be solved. I am a lawyer by practice, so in my daily life, I work with young scientists, so I provide legal advice to them to solve the issues. So having heard of the pollution issues here, it happens in particular in many developing countries, how to solve that. So if we don't learn about what are the bad practice, what goes wrong, like the hypothetical issues, the report was reviewed only because something went wrong, right? And in doing so, I would like to emphasize that the transparency at all levels is important. It's not just at the national government level, regional or local is all important. And that said, once the problems are clearly identified and shared, the role of young scientists or academicians could jump in order to help supporting the data that could plan for the kind of midterm or long-term plan. This would be my view at this moment. Thank you.
Good. Thank you very much for the elaborating what Mr. Kurbanov mentions, in particular the data-based, and also you are working for the young generation. Now, let us move on. Having had around the first round interventions, I would like to again revisit the panelists again to further elaborate your remarks for our interactions among ourselves. Let me come back to you, Ms. Pandaksa. Having your observation and the remarks, could you please follow up your previous remarks you have made, and by elaborating following points, if possible, and what kind of resources and capacities different stakeholders can bring to the solution and to a transformative partnership, according to your experience, and you may have some observation in this regard. At the same time, could you share with us, if possible, concrete experience which you have done in your work? Could you please come back to our floor? Please.
Okay, just to give you a clear example that would best speak of everything. I work at a research institution in Thailand. I work with scientists who also get the funding from the Thai government. So what happened is that when we heard about the pollution in the northern part of Thailand, we provide the funding to the research institution in the northern part. Scientists come up with a solution how to, come up with a method or device to help measuring the dust amount in the northern part. You learn that in Chiang Mai province in Thailand, there is often a forest fire every March It always happened like this, and it caused health issues to Thai citizens in the northern part. So that researcher got the grant from my institute, and as the intellectual properties come into play, we help filing a protection. And now you see that scientists working with IP agent to help protecting, and to make sure that this technology could be provided to the communities and help making a better life. So it's the local government who need to get the license of this technology to make sure that it could be utilized. This has been a kind of actual case at my home institute. At the beginning, we worked with the local government, but it didn't seem to work well because we tried to license our technology to the small entity. But then we try to find a better solution, so we come back and work with the Pollution Control Department of Thailand, and they find out finally a medium enterprise in order to make sure that they could produce a device that could be utilized in the northern part of Thailand. That said, you will see that it's very important to promote partnership. It could happen in many ways, but different stakeholders are important. And you start hearing me talking about funding agency, universities who are the grant recipient, intermediaries like technology transfer officer, including patent agents, lawyers, and of course the community who help making this happen. This is something that I love to see more in other contexts, not just in Thailand, but in this region. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pandaksa, for sharing very concrete examples, cases, including the communication with local government, as well as funding agencies, universities, as well as community. I think this partnership also should be taken into account for our further elaborating effective partnership. Once again, thank you very much. And having said that, let me come back to Mr. Gurbanov. And from your experience in the UNV, and could you please make any advice or suggestions? And what kind of capacity and resources can contribute to integrated solutions? And on what would make partnership change or transformative? Whatever you have the experience in your career, and could you share your insightful observation or experience, please?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I think we've just heard a wonderful example of transformative partnership between the authorities, the scientific community, and the communities themselves. I might suggest a couple of more observations based on my most recent experience as the deputy head of the UN volunteers. And the experience suggests, dear ladies and gentlemen, that whenever a disaster strikes, whether it's because of the pollution case or floods or other climate-induced disasters, or even earthquakes, always the first resource and the first capacity responding to the aftermath of the disaster is the volunteers, always. Whenever we read news about the latest catastrophe, always volunteers are at the front lines of the immediate response. First are the local volunteers who come from the community themselves. It happens immediately after the disaster strikes that the community spontaneously organize themselves, and there are volunteers who are stepping in to provide immediate relief and assistance. Then usually, from the experience, the next actor that steps in are the volunteers from the Red Cross, Red Crescent societies. The Red Cross, Red Crescent societies around the world have national chapters in each country, and they have 12 million volunteers around the world. And they are usually mobilized right after the local volunteers. Within hours, sometimes within days, they come and help with the later stages of relief. They provide humanitarian assistance. Often they provide livelihoods assistance. And then in many instances, when the governments, the member states are calling upon the UN, United Nations also provides United Nations volunteers who come at the later stage of the relief, and they support not so much relief, but they support more transition to development recovery. So in any disasters, with rare exceptions, there's always this pattern that the first resource and the first capacity responding is not these big planes flying in with medical supplies. They're critically important, but usually the first and the foremost are the volunteers from the communities, then from the Red Cross, Red Crescent societies, and then from the United Nations volunteers. So this is a critical resource and capacity. Now, Mr. Chair asked the second question about the transformative partnerships. In our view that I hope will be shared by many of you, partnerships are transformative there and then, where they transform local capacity. So these Red Crescent volunteers, when they come, United Nations volunteers come, sooner or later they leave. They pack up and go, sooner or later. So it is important that in the process of providing relief and recovery assistance, all these volunteers and other partners build the capacity of the local volunteers. Because the next time when the disaster strikes again, and unfortunately, given the impact of the climate change, the question is not if disaster will happen, but when it will happen and where. So when the disaster happens again it will be local volunteers at the front lines. So all these Red Cross, Red Crescent, United Nations volunteers, they must invest in building the capacity of the local volunteers. So the local volunteer networks are more resilient. They will be still spontaneously organized, but they will be better organized. They will be better coordinated. They are involved in the early warning systems as well. And then they can also provide better response to the relief and to the recovery assistance. In our humble view, the partnerships are transformative only there and then when they transform local capacity. So the local capacity can itself find keys to addressing the key risks and vulnerabilities at the community level. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Gurbanov, for sharing very concrete examples, and it is very insightful lessons from your experience, in particular the local volunteer, the activities, and I am very impressed by the kind of partnership on the ground level, and it is the getting into the solution based on the local level partnership. Thank you very much once again, dear Mr. Gurbanov. Now, Honorable Mayor, may I ask once again to you, according to your experience and knowledge, could you please advise us what the effective multi-stakeholders will be able to contribute to solving the complex challenges which you are facing? Any idea, please?
Thank you. Again, ladies and gentlemen, when we work in local government, I have worked for the last 7 years, I think we cannot function in silo. We need to work together as multi-sectoral. And when we talk about waste management, the city government cannot alone manage and avoid pollution in the process, pollution of the air and also groundwater system. So in my journey of last 7 years, we very closely worked with private sector, mainly the youth group. So we have youth group who are willing to come and take the challenge of managing the waste. And since then, we have been able to even segregate waste at source. Like organic waste is one thing that has to be taken separately and composted, and the dry waste is further segregated and being recycled. And these are all partnership. We cannot treat one another as a contractor and a client. We need to work hand in hand because waste management is definitely not a profitable job. So therefore, we need to support each other, and this is how we have come almost 3-4 years, the waste management being outsourced, and the youth group are functioning so well that one time we have a compost organic waste of about 100 truckloads in a month when we just had about 5 truckloads before the initial outsourcing of waste management. So that has created huge impact on the landfill management where organic waste is being composted and dry waste being further segregated. So this is a pure example of collaboration with youth and the private sector. And not only this, now community has to play their role. They are there, out there, who sees whether this youth group comes on time to collect the waste or they don't come. So these are, again, responsibilities of the community that, yes, the services provided by the government reaches them on time and with proper, the schedule. So private sector, community, the government agency, and also the central government giving us support and technical assistance is a pure example where multi-sectoral, if they work together, can function and can succeed. If waste management was not outsourced, I'm sure today the landfill would have overflown, and then the impact onto pollution has been much more. So I'm very happy to share this example, and we are pursuing similar collaborations with various stakeholders so that we can succeed in the process of development. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Mayor Dorji, for your very candid the observation of your experience, in particular for waste management on the ground level by mobilizing youth as well as the private sector, and linkage with the local government as well. And it's going to be the contributing to sustainable development in this regard. And I appreciate very much for your contribution in this regard. Now, let me move on to the next speaker. To my left, once again, Ms. Gomboslen, once again, based on your experience, could you please let us know what we need to effectively involve all the stakeholders toward the transformative collaboration? Based on your experience as the representative of civil society, could you share with us?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So from the civil society point of view, partnership needs to be effective in contribution for local or national development in terms of poverty alleviation, gender equality, and environmental protection. And partnership should be also transparent, participatory, and with accountability mechanism. There are, of course, good examples of collaborations as a result of tireless advocacy work of people's movements in countries of our region and worldwide. And as an example at global level, I would say that GPEDC, this is the Global Partnership for Effective Development Cooperation. This is the, in the governing body of GPEDC, all actors have seats, including civil society organization and trade union. And they are involved in every decision-making process. At our region, many examples also can be mentioned, and I would like to mention this public-public partnerships on water management, which are implemented in more than 100 cities and districts in Asia. And also I would name example of participatory community budget planning also. This is also was very successful collaboration. At local level, I would also like to bring a case of Mongolia. After many years of advocacy work, legal provisions in the mineral law, environment law, administration law, and many other laws have been improved to establish access to information, participation, and access to justice for local communities. As one example is a provision on local development agreement to be set up among three parties: local government, mining company, and local community. If a mining company doesn't fulfill the agreement obligations on environment or social responsibilities, then the community has the right to demand to stop the mining operation. However, mining operations, mining can be done by different business entities: national companies, transnational companies, and small artisanal miners, cooperatives. And the accountability mechanism can be fulfilled differently. Unfortunately, it was very well fulfilled in case of national company or in case of small artisanal miners. But in case of transnational companies, it was not very effective one because transnational companies actually may sue against the government in international arbitrary court according to the investor-state dispute solution procedure and get a fine of 100 millions of US dollar against the government. And Mongolia had several such very sad experience in such arbitration decisions. So this, in conclusion, I really want to say that every SDG like this scenario related to environmental pollution, for example, which is very much related to all SDGs relating to water, soil, land, and you know, with everyone. This is really demand integrated approach, and this integrated approach need to have very very good coordination mechanism, you know. But unfortunately, in my observation, in our countries, we need to set up this effective coordination mechanism, or we need to improve them to work effectively to meet the people's expectation from development. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gombo Suren, for sharing your experience, in particular in the case of local level in Mongolia and the community involvement, they are working together with private sector. But at the same time, you have shared some challenges they are working together with transnational companies. I think in this regard, international community, in particular UN system or international organization, should take the lead or communicate with local level activities. I think this is another partnership should be enhanced through this panel. And also Ms. Gon-Boslen, you have shared the insightful suggestions. Coordinating process, SDGs, is the best opportunity, providing us with the best opportunity to develop this coordinating mechanism. Thank you very much once again for your insightful observation. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let me invite the last speaker of the round 2. We still have the further discussion. Mr. Ibrahim, according to your experience once again, could you please share with us what the business can play for addressing those challenges, what the support you need from other stakeholders, at the same time, what the support you can provide, please.
Thank you very much. In Bangladesh, we understanding the need for the importance of sustainable development goals, and as a national agenda, the highest office, which is the Prime Minister's office, has set up an SDG coordinator's office. And the SDG coordinator office has recently identified the private sector players and associations and trade bodies selectively, those who would partner with the coordinator's office to address all the issues, particularly from the issue of data collection. Because it is very, very important, because the transformative partnership needs to be very strong in data and very strong to provide evidence to the country regarding the budgetary decision, policy and legislation, and to the donors for making decisions for funding based on the data. I would also like to mention here that in our national planning document that we've just gone into the 7th five-year plan. And in the 7th five-year plan, prior to finalizing the plan, severe rounds of consultations take place with the private sector, addressing the issues of climate change, addressing the issues of disaster risk, and addressing the other issues of sustainable development agenda. So as you can see, in order for all these chains to function, it is very, very important that all the actors are very significantly involved in this entire process. The transformative partnership will provide the platform where everybody is on equal footing. The dialogue is very important to discuss what the bottlenecks are, the difficulties, the early victories, achievements, mobilization of the resources, and so forth. So from the point of accountability and visibility, the partnership will support the agenda very powerfully. Supporting knowledge sharing and the country-level partnerships will be provided by the platform. Innovative partnerships can be utilized by the countries to prepare for and respond to such a disaster scenario. No countries need to reinvent the wheel, but instead can consider its peers' successes and lessons learned. I would also like to point here that in Bangladesh, besides the government initiative, which is the SDG Coordinator's Office and our Planning Commission, we've also set up what we call a citizens platform for SDGs. And in this citizens platform for SDGs, we have representation from CSOs, we have representation from academia, we have representation from the private sector. And also in our elongated network, we have almost 60 different CSOs who are working in rural level in Bangladesh. So that gives us the strength to, especially from the perspective of distributing, disseminating information and collecting data, we are finding it extremely useful that these extended networks under the citizens platform are providing us with the necessary inputs that is required to formulate the necessary policy going forward. So I think these are some practical good examples that we can talk about right now.
Thank you very much, Ibrahim, once again, for sharing a very good, very encouraging experience in your country, Bangladesh. In particular, I'm very impressed by your initiative in terms of the citizen platform, and by mobilizing the many multi-stakeholders beyond the government itself. Of course, the role of government is very important. At the same time, mobilizing civil society, and through your initiative on this platform, it is very impressive to me. And 60 CSO have been involved in the rural areas, the development, and the leadership of the owners of leaders of the enterprises also playing a very important role. Thank you again for your sharing a very important aspect. Now, ladies and gentlemen, our panel is supposed to complete by 4:25. We have 1 minute to go, and luckily we have made it in an effective manner, on time. And thank you very much for all panelists for your contribution and the very active discussions. I believe these discussions are able to contribute to further discussions among member states and the international organization, as well as stakeholders, for the rest of this session. Having said that, I would like to conclude the panel discussion today by expressing thanks to all the panelists once again. Please join me in thanking to all the panelists. Thank you very much. Now I would like to pass the microphone to the Vice Chair, Honorable Excellency Thinay Nangjil of Bhutan, to chair the rest of the session. Thank you very much once again.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. Country representatives, major groups, and other stakeholders and representatives of the international community are now invited to make short statements on Agenda Item 3, Session 7. Statements should focus on concrete practices from their countries and constituencies that can serve as illustration of how to address complex sustainable development and resilience challenges through transformative forms of partnership. Statements should be no longer than 3 minutes. I'll first open the floor to statements from member and associate member governments, followed by permanent observers. Once all country statements have been made, I'll invite statements from intergovernmental bodies, after which I'll open the floor to the representatives of UN bodies and specialized agencies, and finally, to designated representatives of civil society, major groups, and other stakeholders. So we'll begin with the country statement. And the first on the list is DPR Korea.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. It is my honor on behalf of the delegation of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea to share our views on partnership for implementation of SDGs at this important forum. Noting that the report by Secretariat on Partnership in Asia and the Pacific for effective implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, my delegation highly appreciates ESCAP for its efforts for building partnership between various stakeholders by identifying common goals and objectives, mutual trust, information and knowledge sharing, strategic planning, and etc. as key elements for building successful partnership in Asia and the Pacific. My delegation is of the view that what is important in building partnership is to cooperate closely with each other among partners at all levels, with commitment and willingness to work together towards common objectives for the implementation of SDGs. Despite the efforts made by the ESCAP and countries in the region for building partnership, unilateral economic sanctions, blockades, and pressures aimed at individual countries with different ideas and systems are still rampant. This poses a serious threat to the national sovereignty, peace, security, and the people's right to existence of developing countries, as well as a huge challenge to their efforts for the implementation of the SDGs. In this context, my delegation cannot but take it to attention that the hostile forces who are displeased with our independent policy and development are imposing unprecedented inhuman sanctions and blockades to stifle our socialist system and even people's life. To ensure smooth implementation of the SDGs by the developing countries, the coercive sanctions, blockades, and the politicization of humanitarian assistance in the field of finance, trade, and investment should be terminated at an earliest date, and the countries in the region should trust and closely cooperate each other towards the common aim of SDGs implementation. Mr. Chair, today the Korean people, under the wise leadership of the respected Supreme Leader Kim Jong-un, are achieving great successes in economic development and improvement of people's livelihood with the force of self-reliance by conducting vigorous campaign for implementing the 5-year strategy of national economic development put forward at the 7th Congress of the Workers' Party of Korea. Thanks to the noble patriotism and great decision of the respected Supreme Leader, who is willing to end confrontation with fellow countrymen and achieve peace on the Korean Peninsula, the North and South Korea successfully celebrated the Winter Olympic Games with joint efforts and are opening up a broad avenue of reconciliation and confrontation. It is the consistent stand of the government of DPRK to develop good neighborly and friendly relations with all countries that respect our national sovereignty and are friendly towards us. Measures that have been taken by the government of DPRK for strengthening partnerships associated with the efforts of the ESCAP and member states to attain SDGs. It is the government DPRK is remain committed to make every possible effort to attain SDGs in partnership with parties concerned at home and abroad before this set timeline. I thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, distinguished delegate from DPR Korea. Now I invite the distinguished delegate from Bangladesh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, distinguished ladies, distinguished panelists, already gone, ladies and gentlemen. We talked about partnership of different stakeholders within the country. Now I would like to focus on regional partnerships in attaining SDGs. This 5th Asia-Pacific Forum for Sustainable Development brings into renewed focus the preamble of the SDGs agenda, calling for a revitalized global partnership for sustainable development, which has been eloquently enunciated in Goal 17 of SDGs. For the well-being of the vast majority of the people in the Asia-Pacific region, such partnership could be effective in, though not limited to, mobilizing knowledge, expertise, technology, and financial resources. Already there are a number of highly impactful regional partnerships in trade, investment, and infrastructure connectivity that promises to be the catalyst of future prosperity of the broader Asia-Pacific community. I'm referring to the partnerships in South Asia. South Asia Association for Regional Cooperation, SAARC, and its offshoot, South Asia Free Trade Agreement, SAFTA, BIMSTEC, Bay of Bengal Initiative for Multi-Sectoral Technical and Economic Cooperation, ASEAN or ASEAN +6 in East Asia and the Pacific, which is on way to becoming a wider partnership for comprehensive economic cooperation, among others. Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which is called, in short, RCEP. Last but not least, there is China's Belt and Road Initiative, which extends beyond regional connectivity to wider economic cooperation among contiguous nations extending from East to West Asia and beyond. Whereas ASEAN began with objective of establishing a free trade area, member countries soon found it worthwhile to extend cooperation to a whole range of economic activities. The 21st century thinking about these regional agreements is to extend the scope of cooperation beyond trade and investment onto other fields that help enrich human lives. Bangladesh so far has been an ardent participant in the South Asia and Bay of Bengal initiatives, but we are eager to extend the frontiers of our cooperation to the larger economic groups in Asia Pacific. Viewed in this perspective, it is possible to visualize these sub-regional communities to leverage their agreements into partnerships also for sustainable development of the kind that is the focus of the current forum. Trade and investment cooperation actually breaks barriers in the mobilization of knowledge, technology, and finance, three integral associated components of trade and investment expansion. Therefore, existing economic cooperation agreements in Asia-Pacific have the enormous potential to evolve into partnerships for sustainable development. For Bangladesh, a particularly winning strategy would include extending cooperation beyond the South Asia region, while widening the scope of partnership from trade in goods and services onto other forms of cooperation that includes labor mobility, assimilation of knowledge, technology, and financial integration, all of which have enormous potential to boost job-creating trade and investment. Leading analysts have predicted that 21st century will be an Asian century. Global and regional trends of today singularly point in that direction. Bangladesh takes an optimistic view of the rising prosperity in Asia-Pacific region, a development that can only create economic opportunity in the future, which Bangladesh hopes to harness in a sustainable way by seeking to establish mutually reinforcing partnership with communities across the entire region. Thank you very much.
Thank you, distinguished delegate from Bangladesh. Now may I request distinguished delegate from India to make a statement.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm grateful to you to give me this opportunity on behalf of my country in this session on partnerships for implementation of SDGs. Partnership has been a leading idea, principle, tool, as well as a vehicle for proceeding on SDGs in India. In every effort we have made, partnership has figured in a substantive manner. I would like to share key aspects of our experience in this direction. India is a federal polity, and in a fundamental sense, partnership is built into a bedrock of our existence and progress. Its states and the union territories at sub-national level work with the union government on day-to-day basis. Niti Aayog, that is National Institute for Transforming India, has the mandate to strengthen the ethos of this partnership for nation building, which we termed as cooperative and competitive federalism. Niti Aayog provides states and the union territories with policy support, technical assistance, knowledge and capacity development, coordination and problem solving. It also builds up a competitive performance perspective by setting up indicators and benchmarks of the progress in different sectors. As the institution responsible for overseeing the implementation of SDGs at the country level, Niti Aayog plays a similar role. Niti Aayog has facilitated a mapping of the government development programs and initiatives across the country, which has enabled alignment of all development interventions according to the Sustainable Development Goals and their targets. It has continued a consultation and communication process involving all stakeholders, that is central ministries, states, union territories, civil society organizations, academia, business sector organization, and United Nations and other international organizations. This has created a powerful multi-sector consensus on the SDGs in the country. Niti Aayog's partnership with civil society organizations has led to the intensification of awareness at all levels. It is also enabling improving outreach to various social groups, communities, and citizens across the country. The work with think tanks, research institutions, and academia is producing a rich harvest of knowledge, information, inputs, which are very useful in SDGs-related activities, that is, voluntary national review, indicator framework, etc. Partnerships with industries and businesses is currently being deepened to unleash new entrepreneurial initiatives and innovations to strengthen implementation of different sustainable development goals. India is committed to strengthen partnership at regional and international levels, and I would like to indicate a few areas in this direction. Discussion on national SDG indicator frameworks, monitoring and data management systems, and sharing experiences and information at the regional level will be very useful partnership initiatives. While helping each country in their own effort, it will strengthen understanding and assessment of progress at regional level. Capacity building and technology support has already been highlighted. It will be important to quickly move in some of the important areas like food security, climate change, sustainable energy solutions, and energy and infrastructure development. And at the end, we look forward to progress in enhancing dividends of partnership at the regional level and opening up new frontiers. As I conclude, I thank you once again, Chair, for giving me this opportunity. Thank you very much.
Thank you, distinguished delegate from India. Are there any other government who wish to make a... Yep. Okay. Distinguished delegate from China.
谢谢主席先生。主席先生，构建全球伙伴关系，应以联合国为核心，南北合作为主持道，南南合作为补充。应坚持开放包容，遵循联合国宪章的宗旨和原则，树立人类命运共同体意识，维护多边贸易体制，完善全球治理，提升发展中国家的发言权和代表性，让发展成果更多、更公平地惠及各国人民。中国将继续本着共商、共建、共享的原则，大力推进“一带一路”国际合作，充分利用中国联合国和平与发展基金、南南合作援助基金等平台，深化南南合作，在减贫、 基础设施、农业、能源等发展中国家最为关注的领域开展更多的合作，加强贸易投资合作和宏观经济政策协调，继续扩大对最不发达国家的进口和投资，促进国际发展环境优化。中国愿以更加积极的姿态，推进与国际社会的伙伴关系建设，包括加强与 ESCAP 的合作伙伴关系，共同促进可持续发展议程的实施。谢谢主席先生。
Thank you, distinguished delegate from China. I will now open the floor to major groups and other stakeholders in the order provided by the Secretariat. I recognize the representative from Constituency Group of Women with Disability, delivered by Savina Taulasia.
Thank you, Excellency Chair. Resilience is essential to achieving sustainable development, and in order to achieve this, the furthest behind must be meaningfully included, such as persons with disabilities as important stakeholders. The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development embodies a commitment to inclusion of those furthest behind and to reduce their risks to economic, social, and environmental shocks. While the 2030 Agenda defines the SDGs, it is the CRPD that stipulates how to achieve these goals for persons with disabilities. Globally, persons with disabilities make up 15% of the world's population, 80% of whom live in poverty. Nearly 36% of the global population lacks access to sanitation, and 884 million people lack access to clean drinking water, which often affects the poorest communities. Thus, approximately 117 million persons with disabilities are adversely affected and without access to clean water and sanitation. In addition, more than half of persons with disabilities live in towns and cities that are rarely accessible. And this number is estimated to grow to 1 billion by 2030. The global population of people forcibly displaced reached a record 66 million in 2016, with as many as 10 million being persons with disabilities. Due to barriers in accessing the built environment, information, and communication, persons with disabilities are denied access to basic urban services, including housing, roads, public spaces, transportation, basic urban services such as sanitation and water, health, education, transportation, emergency, and disaster response. To achieve safe, sustainable, and resilient societies for persons with disabilities, the realization of the 2030 Agenda must be undertaken by the complete implementation of the CRPD. It is generally feasible to meet accessibility requirements to 1% of the total cost. On the contrary, retrofitting for accessibility is more expensive when it is costing up to 20% of the original cost compared to integrating accessibility and universal design principles into new buildings. Moreover, the collection and disaggregation of data by disability by using the short set of questions of the Washington Group to inform national policymakers about policy gaps and challenges for persons with disabilities is crucial to monitor both the inclusion of persons with disabilities in SDG-related activities and the realization of disability-related targets. Sustainable Development Goal 11 reflects a recognition of the importance of making all settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. Accessibility is one of the 8 general principles of the CRPD. It is a precondition to live independently, enjoyment of other rights, and important in all rights for persons with disabilities. State parties are obliged to take measures to ensure access to the physical environment, transportation, information, and communications, financial services, exercise the right to adequate housing and other rights, and to other facilities open to or provided to the public, both in urban and rural areas. Thank you, Your Excellency.
Thank you, representative of Constituency Group of Women with Disability. Next, I have on the list representative of Constituency Group of Workers and Trade Union, delivered by Julius Kanglet.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm from the Federation of Free Workers, an affiliate of the International Trade Union Confederation, Workers and Trade Union Major Group, and a constituency of the RSEM. Any partnership should be judged based on the objectives for establishing it. If the objectives are flawed from the beginning, then it won't serve the SDGs. Workers believe that public-private partnerships should only be consummated if the following conditions are met. First, we ask the question, to what level will the partnership serve national development goals in relation to SDGs? And in the first place, were the national economic and social development goals defined in close consultation and with meaningful participation of the people, including the workers? Second is on ownership. Will the state or territory own up and benefit from the outcome or outputs of the partnerships to serve better its citizens? Or would the result of the partnership be beneficial to the private sector only, particularly multinational corporations or big local enterprises, who may only want to ensure that they gain more profits at the expense of their own workers and the community that suffers from pollution? Third, will stakeholders or those that the partnership purport to serve be consulted in a meaningful manner and have direct or indirect participation in its implementation, monitoring, and evaluation of the partnerships, and to the extent possible, impact assessment? If PPP project implementation will involve hiring of workers, will workers and trade union rights be respected? Dear governments, I hope you remember that by virtue of membership to the International Labour Organization, governments are obliged to respect fundamental principles and rights at work, meaning respect for the right to form unions, right to collective bargaining, right to protection against all forms of discrimination at work, protection from slavery and slave-like conditions, including dangerous work and work that destroys the environment, and elimination of child labor. Fifth, more jobs alone as a result of partnerships is not enough. Partnerships should result to decent work. This means that apart from the aforementioned rights, quality of employment should be promoted, together with social protection and measures to ensure a just transition from coal-fired and dirty energy to renewable clean energy. Workers also note that in the Philippines, despite a highly skilled and professional workforce, many of whom are forced by circumstances to work abroad, from 2014 to 2017, there was a more than 100% increase in employed foreign nationals, many of whom we believe are acting as expensive consultants whose expertise may be at par with locals, and perhaps this represents the bulk of resources resulting from PPPs and ODA. Sixth, partnerships, apart from being monitored and evaluated, should have a grievance mechanism. Such grievance mechanism should provide ample protection for complainants and whistleblowers without fear of retaliation from the corporations or even from government agencies or officials who are subject of the complaint. And finally, to wrap it up, workers and trade unions pose social dialogue as a mode of partnership. One of the pillars of decent work, social dialogue ensures that from sharing of information to sitting at the negotiation table on labor and employment and social and economic issues, workers and business should be treated at equal footing by the government. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, representative of Constituency Group of Workers and Trade Unions. Next, we have a representative of Constituency Group of Women, delivered by Helen Hakena.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, my name is Helen Hakena, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Women Constituency of the Asia-Pacific CSO Engagement Mechanism. The scenario we heard in the panel just now, as pointed out by my colleague on the panel, are in fact not only a scenario for many communities in this region. Across the region, communities have been and are still suffering the effect of environmental destruction and degradations, from death, diseases, to violence and conflict, to loss of livelihood. I myself is from one of those communities. I'm from Bougainville, an island a little larger than Cyprus, and is an autonomous region of Papua New Guinea that suffered a 20-year war when one of the world's largest open-pit mines, Panguna, destroyed our rivers, our land and environment, and our communities. Even though the mines and logging on our island produced hundreds of millions of dollars in profits, our island did not become prosperous. Together, the mine and the war led to terrible maternal and child health outcomes, militarized communities. Today, 28 years later, the effects of the mining and the war remains. All these harms to the communities were possible through the partnership between the government, foreign investors, and large companies. If this is what partnership for development means, something is seriously wrong, and we must challenge the notion of development and partnership. For me, the most important partnership is the partnership with the community. The most essential ingredient of any partnership is the consent, engagement, and trust of the people. Genuine partnerships only exist and can work where we share solidarity, shared objectives, and visions. Partners that come in for other reasons, to make money, to exploit resources, to gain power, cannot be at the heart of the partnership. In my community, we are building solidarity amongst women, amongst men and young people, amongst the displaced people and the communities they are settled to, amongst government leaders and women. When our people know what they want, many others can support us in solidarity. Those who want the best for our community while respecting what we want, whether they be other governments. For example, several countries are helping to rebuild our community center after it was burnt down, and helping with renewable energies, based on the principle of global solidarity as enshrined in the Universal Declaration on Human Rights. Or the social enterprises that wants to support the models we have selected, whether that be exporting some of the products we make, and we want to enter into partnership where the knowledge we have developed, whether that be the knowledge of using coconut oil to run combustion engines, or the knowledge of our medicinal herbs is used in solidarity, I'm almost there, Chair, for the benefit of our people and the planet without being stolen from us through intellectual property practices, and the power to make decisions over our collective resources stays with the people. We know that it would take courage from governments to shift from the dominant model of partnership, which is heavily reliant on large corporations and business sectors, to an accountable public-public partnership model. However, this is possible, and we want you, member states, to know that you have our support to make the SDGs partnership accountable to the peoples and deliver development justice. Thank you.
Thank you, representative of Constituency Group of Women. May I now invite representative of Constituency Group of NGO, delivered by Yodhimi de la Rosa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Yodhim de la Rosa from the Reality of Aid Network and the CSO Partnership for Development Effectiveness. And I am speaking here on behalf of the NGO constituency of the Asia-Pacific Civil Society Engagement Mechanism. We recognize the efforts made by member states in their VNRs, especially those that engage civil society in their respective review processes. The voluntary nature of the process, however, undermines accountability, universality, and the global commitment made 3 years ago. We caution against the continued voluntary nature of reporting and participation and how it results in differing levels of quality of the reports, where some are comprehensive while others are exclusive, selective, and lacking in depth and reality. The guidelines and process for review at all levels need to be transparent and more participatory to enable CSOs' active engagement. The HLPF fails to address the trend of closing spaces for civil society, nor do they detail how exactly this partnership will be strengthened. Many communities now are collecting data that are often missed. Such community efforts need to be scaled up and incorporated in the official monitoring process. Various CSOs in the region are actively monitoring the SDGs implementation. In the past HLPFs, many national CSO networks submitted alternative reports to the forum. These reports point at existing grassroots initiatives for attaining SDGs and should be incorporated in the stakeholders' reports. The international community must outline the modalities to improve the quality of these partnerships, particularly in the light of the increasing role of the private sector in the 2030 Agenda. Development justice, effective development cooperation, and human rights-based principles must be at the foundation of these partnerships. Moreover, all parties must meet more than their full ODA commitments and reduce the burden on poorer countries, especially LDCs. Regional and global cooperation is required to end illicit financial flows caused by tax evasion and cross-country transfer by corporations. Governments must use direct taxes in a transparent and equitable manner. Unfair trade rules in international trade and investment and rising mega free trade agreements are harming vulnerable and marginalized peoples and communities of developing and least developed countries, as well as threatening their economic sovereignty and sustainable development prospects. We call for a participatory and comprehensive SDG compatibility impact assessment of the trade and investment agreements and for a new global trade architecture that provides the policy flexibility and preferential treatment for developing countries. The UN and governments should strongly promote and support traditional knowledge systems for SDGs, agroecology, community-based seed systems, and engage in competition decisions on mergers. Governments and the UN system must work towards a convention to address corporate concentration and initiate civil society-led participatory technology assessment platforms to interrogate new technologies and their potential impacts to people, livelihoods, and environment. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, representative of Constituency Group of NGO. May I now invite representative of Constituency Group of Indigenous People, delivered by Patricia Watimina.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, we would like to support very strongly the statement that was just delivered by the by women and NGO constituencies. Mr. Chair, we welcome the 12 steps of multi-stakeholder partnership framework proposed in the document in the reference to this agenda item on partnerships in Asia and the Pacific for effective implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development Cycle. In the document, partnerships are considered as a system of collaborative process that support each other. However, we are concerned that public-private partnerships promoted by the SDGs will evict us from our lands and territories, destroy our traditional knowledge and governance, threatening our survival. The SDGs are strongly anchored on the principles of human rights and democracy. However, there is an increasing trend of targeting human rights and environmental defenders in many countries of Asia as terrorists. The recent case being the allegation against renowned indigenous leaders in the Philippines as terrorists. This is a trend that will seriously hamper the achievement of the universal commitment of the SDGs. Government shall establish and communicating a transparent, participatory, and inclusive processes in the review of the SDGs by building multi-stakeholder partnerships framework which is based on equitable relationships. Government need to strengthen efforts to publicize their plans and opportunities for participation, sharing common challenges, and increase rights holders and stakeholder engagement. Mr. Chair, let me take this opportunity to acknowledge the delegation from Sweden, who yesterday in this plenary recognized the needs for a broader engagement on the roles of the rights holders and the need to analyze the other knowledge systems for relevant solution that is with people and not for people. The need to be more research on participation that is full and effective and it's not forced and not limited. We also thank IVAT, FAO, and IUCN for recognizing the importance of indigenous people's rights as well as small-scale farmers, women, and youth, and the contribution of our livelihoods and traditional knowledge of ecosystem function. Traditional knowledge to ecosystem functions and services, including our spiritual relationship with Mother Nature. We believe that the realization of leaving no one behind is possible only with the full recognition and integrating human rights commitments into their national laws, regulation, and policies that include and ensuring full and effective participation of the right holders, not limited to, but including indigenous peoples, fisher folks, persons with disabilities, women, youth, and others. Thank you.
Thank you, representative of Constituency Group of Indigenous People. Are there any other representative from major group or other stakeholders who wish to make a statement? Please go ahead. I can't see. Maybe you could, yeah.
Yes. My name is Revadi Pasacharansuk from Thailand, Sustainable Development Foundation from Small Scale Fisher Folk Community. My input is at this forum is on behalf of CSO Engagement Mechanism from Asia Pacific. Partnership should be informed by the critical understanding of development process, namely the examination of the content and purpose of aids and development, based on human rights principles and accountability of states. Partnership of all types, especially the so-called multi-stakeholder partnerships, should be shaped by inclusive structure for accountability based on human rights principles for donors and governments, and should promote the alignment of donor country priorities with national development plan and fully accessible aid data. The MDG were underpinned by one global partnership between governments based on the principle of global partnerships and solidarity and responsibility of enshrined in the UDHR, where government were the primary partner to be supported by other actors, including the civil society organization. But the SDG discussion has forced achieved to smaller partnerships mainly to justify a withdrawal of government, primarily in developed countries, from contributing to the common financing needs of global partnership for development, with an overwhelming emphasis now on private sector financing. The public-private partnership and branch finance, especially in the developing country, continue to affect severe consequences on the issue of equity and access, especially for the poor and marginalized. PPP have likewise facilitated human rights violations, including land grabs and displacement of indigenous people, rural and urban communities, and proportionally negative impact on women. The unrestrained promotion of branded finance pose threat to the achievement of the 2030 agenda and should be assessed against the genuine spirit of development if there is one. We caution against the growth given to and leveraging the public finance to support partnership with the private sector that does not respect international human rights standards and the high level of accountability and transparency in development. Private sector entity involved the development cooperation must adhere to all development justice, effective development cooperation and human rights principles and norms, international labor standards, promotion and practice of decent work, and adopt international transparency and accountability norms. The private sector must enable, not undermine, these fundamental principles. Regulatory, supervisory, and accountability mechanism and binding declaration founded on international human rights, labor, and environmental standards, therefore need to be strengthened and applied to the all private sector action. Member states should further their resolve and enforce a strong binding legal framework to regulate. Mr. Chair, I'm going to almost finish. To regulate the private sector, in particular, multinational corporation and other business activity. Member states must also ensure that the private sector hold the right, regard the highest standard of human rights, international labor standard, transparency, and accountability, while outlining the modality of help improve the quality of this partnership, particularly in the light of over unchecked reliance and private sector delivery, the SDG. We recommend that the international community describe clear criteria by which to access the private sector intervention in development, mechanism by which to hold them accountable, and provide remedy for severe adverse social, gender, environmental, economic, and human rights impact and development program. Measure to enforce transparency includes ex-ante assessment of ex-partnership and meaningful participation of social partners and stakeholders. We also want government to engage more with small enterprises as well as community and social enterprise, which provide many best practices in this regard and offer much better solutions than profit-oriented corporations whose actions are most often damaging the pursuit of sustainable development. At the same time, we see partnership with civil society being undermined not only generally but even in the process of SDG planning, implementation, and monitoring. CSO and grassroots community in particular harbor tremendous knowledge and experience of canvases, a wide range of areas, and are often of most faithful practitioners of sustainable development. We call upon the governments to work in partnership with civil society toward meeting SDG, and in particular, include the voice of marginalized community, including the poor farmer, workers, small-scale fisher, patient group, LGBTIQ, indigenous people, and women. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, and I would also like to thank the moderator, the panelists, and all the speakers for all your contribution and for the excellent segment. We will now move on to agenda item 4, other matters. So if there are any other matters that needs to be discussed. I see none. So with this, I will close the session and our discussion for today.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for a very productive day. I now invite all participants to join us for the launch of the Guidelines for Multi-Stakeholder Partnerships, followed by a partnering cocktail reception. The launch will start shortly in the theatre on the ground floor of the conference centre. You will find the theatre when you go down the escalators and turn to your right and walk down the hallway on the ground floor. Tomorrow, we invite you to join us for a number of side events starting from 8:30 a.m. Please find more information on the side events online and on our touchscreens. All participants who have not yet spoken to our volunteers to calculate their carbon emissions kindly do take a few minutes tomorrow morning to take this short survey. We can only offset our meeting emissions with your input. Thank you. We will reconvene for consideration of agenda item 5 tomorrow at 3 p.m. in this conference room. The draft report and chair summary will be available for review by delegations on the APFSD website from 2 p.m. tomorrow. We encourage you to view the documents digitally via your laptops or handheld devices rather than printing. Thank you for your kind attention. Please make your way down to the ground floor for the launch and enjoy your evening.